Well, hello, everybody, and online and in the room. I'm Leslie Pilak. I'm the museum director at Birmingham Museum. And this presentation really is based on one that we put together in 2019. And as a result of that presentation, we were able to bring both some members of the Levin family in the room with us who shared some stories and talked about their family. So I want to let you all know that that earlier slideshow was also transferred to DVD, and I have some free copies up here. What you would get on this that you can't get today is we had Sander and Carl Levin here, who are members of the family, and they were referencing, and I don't have a way to include that, but it is on here, and these are available. So I'll remind you again at the end. Yes.
My name is David Levinson. I was also there.
And you're back, so you can reminisce on your own maybe. So David, for those in the online audience, David Levinson, descendant, is also here tonight. Thanks for coming, David. All right, let's get going a little bit. So a lot of the photos that you're going to see in here of the Levin and Levinsons came from the family. And we have permission to not only use them, but also we have them in our collection of the digital versions of them at the museum. When we were doing the 2019 program, we were trying to cover some firsts in Birmingham, first families in that particular case. And that is how it kind of fell into the story of the Levinsons as the first Jewish family in Birmingham. And that led to doing some of this research, putting this together back then. So today's presentation is a bit of a reprise, but it also will include some new content and a little bit cleaned up. And we have David here again, so maybe we can have time and he might want to share something, or maybe not. I don't want to put you on the spot too much. Well, actually, I do kind of put you on the spot. But let's get going here. So first, I'm not Jewish, and I'm not trying to represent an understanding of being Jewish, but I am a local historian, and the story of the first Jewish family in Birmingham is one that all of us should be especially interested in, because the Levinsons made a huge impact on this community from the time they came here all the way really to the present. So this is the plug of our current. Is it picking me up all right? Just a moment, okay. This is our current exhibit. It runs through the end of this year, and the Levinson story is part of this exhibit. What I guess I would say is that we at the museum, I would say we're curious. We ask questions a lot, like, what happened to the Native Americans in this area? What can we find out about that? Were there ever any Asian American stories related to Birmingham? And that turned into a whole exhibit. And we have a much greater diversity in Birmingham's history than anyone would have imagined. So please feel free, if there are flyers, I'm going to promote. So there are a couple flyers over there, and I have one or two more up here. Come over to the museum and check it out. We're getting all kinds of really positive reviews of this. Mostly people walk around going, oh, I didn't know that. So you'll be surprised, maybe you'll enjoy it. All right, so to set the scene a little bit, this is in a depiction of the village of Birmingham in the late 19th century. You get kind of a sense of what is happening in Birmingham in and around the time that the Levinsons ended up coming here. It was a rural agricultural settlement, and in this particular image, it's kind of hard to figure out where is Woodward, or what we would think of now as Woodward is the Saginaw Trail, but it kind of runs from left to right in this image. A little bit more of a sense of what the countryside was like around the village of Birmingham. So the village, this sort of a pastoral view. This actually is taken from Southfield, looking west, and that in the background is the mill that used to stand along Maple Road, which now is down by Horton Lake. Another idea of what was going on here at the time, I love maps, and so I try to fit them into my presentations whenever possible. This is actually a 1908 map, but it shows Birmingham virtually unchanged from the 1880s and 1890s. And what you can see here is that it was pretty much concentrated, the village in roughly a square mile, and everything around it was farmland. That being said, the village was actually prosperous and kind of I love the caption that was written in by the photographer in this 1890 photo. It says, "A busy day in Birmingham." And these buggies are coming and going, and that's the dirt roads that appear to be, I think that's the intersection of Maple and Woodward, or at the time it was Saginaw. At the time, again, there were 4 churches in Birmingham. It had a commercial downtown, and a lot of the residential areas were very quaint, and it was a comfortable small town. So by the mid 1890s, some new technology began to change what happened in town. Population was growing, the economy was changing and changing over from some of the original agrarian kind of economy to something a little more commercial. But light rail technology was a game changer, especially in Birmingham. This is the light rail that was called the Detroit United Railway. And that was a light rail that ran between Detroit and Pontiac, right up Woodward Avenue. And if you look at this photo, you can see the rails right in the middle of the, again, dirt road. I want you to pay attention to, it's not paved, it doesn't even have bricks, it's just dirt. So the importance of the DUR, I'm gonna, comment on again in a moment. So the DUR came through in around 1896, and it provided something that hadn't been there before, which is a quick and easy way to get on transportation in Birmingham, go down to Detroit, go up to Pontiac, or go between the two. Another great shot of downtown Birmingham, again, setting the scene, what it was like here at the time. I use this one because it's like the kids could go play in the middle of Woodward Avenue, which is the intersection there is Woodward and Maple. And so you're standing in this view, if you're familiar with Birmingham, you're actually standing pretty much in the middle of Maple Road looking straight east. And that intersection is Woodward coming across in front of you. So now that you've got the stage set in Birmingham, what was going on there, I want to talk about the immigration of Jews to Michigan, just to touch on some of the basic points. The Jews began to come to Michigan and settle in the Detroit area. First, in the mid-19th century, they were generally from Germany. So there's a large German Jewish population, and they settled especially in the Hastings area of Detroit. Then there was another wave of immigration, which from 1880s to all the way up to the World War I, which were more Eastern European Jews from Poland, from Russia, from Latvia, and some other of the Eastern European countries. So what would typically happen is that Jews who would immigrate here, would come to a community where they already knew Jewish people lived. But because of economics, the way that often people would get their start to begin to be self-sustaining would be that they, especially if there are rural areas, some Jewish immigrants would begin as peddlers. So they would take their wares and essential items around to some of those rural farms, like I was showing you, and they would use wagons to go from place to place. And that is how they basically took their goods as merchants, early merchants, around with them. There were huge economic booms in agriculture and lumber in the late 19th century and the early 20th century in Michigan. There were population shifts. So this method of working your way up to the point that you would actually become a more prosperous was a kind of predictable way to succeed. More specifically in Detroit and Oakland County, we have connections from this area to the Detroit community. As I mentioned, the first group of Jewish people who came to Detroit were mostly from Germany. And they established themselves in Detroit for a long time, especially in the Hastings Street neighborhood. And then in the 1870s and 80s, the Russian and the Eastern European Jews came to join them. When it came to Jews relocating into Oakland County in the 1890s, there are two families that I want to mention. One was in Pontiac. The first Jewish family there were the Barnett family. It was Joseph and Rachel. They raised their family there, and they went into the retail business. They founded the Pontiac Clothing Company in 1895. So how did they get to Pontiac? How did they move around? Well, the same way that the Levinsons did. It was that light rail system. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. So then the second Jewish family that I was able to find in Oakland County were the Levinsons, who came to Birmingham. Their business was the Levinsons department store, which they founded in 1896, 1 year later. So the two important things that were emphasized, I think, by both families were that they were able to keep close family and community ties, and they were able to keep kosher and religious traditions, because even though they were no longer in the Jewish community down in Detroit, they could get back and forth easily, and that was a game changer, as I already mentioned. So these are the people that come into the Levinson story. Isaac and Hannah Bloomberg Levinson. Now notice Levinson is spelled both ways, and that's because people migrating from Europe, often their names were changed on the paperwork when people came into the country. And so sometimes spellings were changed. And so I've seen it both ways in documents. But once the Levinsons get, kind of settled into their lives here, it's spelled with the I. So Isaac Levinson and his wife Hannah Bloomberg were both born in Latvia, and you can see they were born in early to the 19th century. They actually ended up immigrating to Bay City in 1888. That's where they came to from Europe. They were fleeing the Russian pogroms that were targeting Jews at the time all over Eastern Europe and Russia. They had the following children: Rebecca, Menachem, Isaac, Morris, and Rosa. If you look at where these children were born, you see that the Levinsons, Isaac and Hannah, were moving a lot. So they were in Latvia, then they were in Russia, then they were in Germany, then they were in Latvia again. And then finally, they fled all the way to America and ended up in Bay City. Then the other family of interest here is the Fellhandler or Fellman family. Again, another one of those families that is known in the documents all three ways. Mordecai and Bessie. And they had more than just these two children, but these are the only ones whose names I know. Augusta, who was went back by the name of Gitel, I think that was her middle name. So that's what she didn't go by Augusta, but she did go by Gitel. And Malka. And there's a map there, if you're not familiar with the location of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, you can see Poland and Belarus in this map, because this is an older map to show you closer to the boundaries that they were dealing with. And then Russia is to the east. So that is the inset. It shows you like right across the Baltic, that's Sweden and Norway and Finland. For these two young people who were basically teenagers when they migrated. And one of the things that we know about children, even in dire circumstances like this, they tend to be resilient. And so these young people were actually probably better prepared to adapt and adjust than their parents would have been. So let me tell you a little bit about them. So Gitel was born in 1872. She was born in Latvia. She came alone to the US at age 15 in 1890. She spoke no English. She came to live with a brother who was in Detroit, who had previously immigrated there. Now, age 15, speaks no English, came alone from Latvia, Russia, to the US. What must that have been like for a 15-year-old woman? And then there's Morris's story. Morris also was born in 1872, also in Latvia. And he had migrated with his parents to Bay City a couple of years before Gitel came. His brother Isaac and his brother Menachem, they stayed in Bay City. His parents stayed in Bay City, but Morris came to Detroit, where the action was. He was a young guy with lots of good ideas and lots of energy, apparently. So he came around 1890, and he met Gitel there, and they got married in 1893. So what brought the couple from Detroit to Birmingham? A way to answer that question is to say, well, first, we know that Morris drove a wagon just as many other Jewish peddlers did at the time. And he went from farm to farm in the Birmingham area. He basically built a customer base. He was a charming young guy, lots of energy. He made friends. He often would be invited to stay overnight in some of these farms. It's a long way around to these farms and then back to Detroit again. He was eventually invited to open a store in town. So I don't know when he exactly began to work the area, but it was a couple of years, probably around the time he got married, but it was 1896 when he finally opened a store in Birmingham. He also launched himself right into the business community. And as I mentioned earlier, the DUR was the key way that Morris and Gitel, once they settled in Birmingham, could get down to Detroit when they needed to, you know, maintain their kosher traditions, make sure that they could get back in time, and also worship and stay connected to the Jewish community, even though they lived in Birmingham. And so here is the store. And this is, if you're familiar with Birmingham, you might recognize this building is where the Starbucks is right now. This is also called the Frank Ford building. It was built by Frank Ford, but it was a brand new building when he invited Morris Levinson to move into the building. It was not actually Morris's first store. His first store was a little bit down the street from 1896 to 98 on the south side of Maple, just east of Woodward. And according to the oral history we have, it was called an economy store, and it was an old building, had all kinds of structural problems. So by the time the building was built in 1898 and they could move in, he was comfortable enough to begin to move into like definitely a more upscale retail environment. He continued to move up, and the store expanded. By 1905, he occupied 5 different stores in that building, all the lower level retail spots. And he, the name of the store was changed from Levinsons department store at some point to the Birmingham department store. So next time you go into Birmingham's Starbucks, just say hi to Morris. And then a little bit more about business. So the final location of the store was at 128 to 132 South of Woodward. And that is represented by this photo here with the circle to give you an idea of where it was. I actually do not know if the building had been replaced by then, but that was the physical location. So you can see it's a few stores down from the corner where Levinsons had been located. They were forced out of the Ford building because the bankers came in and bought the place. Banking became really big at that time, and so there was plenty of cash flowing. And so Levinsons continued down the street there until 1937. So that's sort of the story of the store, not the story of the family in total. Here's an ad that we found in the 1939 Piper yearbook. The Birmingham Museum has the yearbooks from the different schools. So you can see that what they were promoting even then was footwear, ready-to-wear, dry goods, household goods, prompt and courteous service, free delivery in Birmingham. How about that one? And there's the location at 128 to 132 South Oak Woodward. And the photo, again, thanks to the Levin family, is Morris Levinson in the 1930s, around that same time.
Leslie, you have a question or chat, would you like me to wait till the end?
No, we can do it now.
The question is, how long would the train ride be to Detroit?
The question is, how long would the train ride be on the DUR to Detroit? I don't know the exact answer to that, but I can only tell you that when the DUR was first put in, it was much slower. And then as the technology improved, I know that it was faster, and I know it was inexpensive. It was not costly to ride that way. Those are the only things I can say for sure. Okay, so now what I want to do is maybe take a little bit of a deeper dive into the Levinsons' lives as the first Jews in Birmingham. So in addition to being a new merchant in town and a successful commercial and retail presence, Morris became a member of the Birmingham Masonic Lodge. Now, you probably are aware that the Masons are not necessarily associated with Judaism, but they're not associated with Judaism. It was actually a very good way to connect with other business members and to have another way to communicate in the business, in the commercial community of Birmingham. The family lived in Birmingham after 1898 and all the way to 1920. And first they lived at the northwest corner of Danes and Woodward, and next they lived at the southwest corner of Brown and Purdy Street, and that's where they lived until they left. Now, they had 4 children while they were here in Birmingham. Aaron, who was born in 1894, David, 1896, Bess in 1898, and Hyman or HY in 1900. And I also have an inset photo of like what it might have looked in the 1920s when the Levinsons still lived in town. The key point that the family talked about quite a bit with me is that Bess was born at home. So they like to say that she was the first Jew born in Birmingham because she was born actually in Birmingham at home. And maybe the only Jew that has ever been born in Birmingham, since everyone since has probably been born in a hospital. Bess and David attended the Birmingham public schools, and then the family moved to Detroit in 1920, and the kids were all grown up by that point. And but they continued to operate the store, but they relocated back in Detroit, and I'm not sure where. David, where did?
No, I was actually, I think the comment in the fact that my father remembers visiting his grandmother on Pierce Street.
On Pierce Street?
Yeah, when he was young.
So I have to
He
look up.
was born in 1926.
Okay, so we're gonna have to look and see if temporarily they also lived on Pierce Street. We didn't have that.
And I don't know if it's after Morris died.
Right, right.
or During that.
Where
time.
could it-
I do know he mentioned many times.
Yeah.
Visiting his grandmother.
Okay.
in Pierce.
All right, thank you. So we had to check that out, more for us to do. And in case you were wondering, this is Brown Street around that time, around the time that they would have lived on Brown Street. Again, I really love the dirt roads. I emphasize that because if you're gonna be, moving around quickly, you really do need to use the DUR, even if it rolls along slowly, because you're not in the mud. You're on light rail. I'd like to tell you a little bit about each of the kids. The first one, this is not necessarily in the order of their birth, but HY went on to, so he lived until 1991. He stayed in the Michigan area much of that time. He went to and graduated from U of M in 1922. He owned the Farmington Enterprise newspaper in the late 1920s and 1930s. And he was also a radio pioneer. He founded WCAR radio in 1939. That's pretty early in the radio business. It's now known as WDFN, for those of you who were wondering. And so that was where he made his mark. And we do not have a photo of him. So David, if you have any that you can share, we could not find any anywhere that we could get hold of anyway. Another brother was Aaron, and Aaron lived till 1961. He graduated from Detroit Central High School, so that's where he went to school. So the Levinsons lived here, but Aaron went to school in Detroit. So I assume he was living with relatives, so he could go to high school there. Then he also went to U of M law school, graduated in 1916. He became a master at the Birmingham Masonic Lodge also. And interestingly, we found that he defended the village of Birmingham in a 1921 lawsuit before the Michigan Supreme Court, which related to the DUR. The DUR the DUR, apparently the village of Birmingham and the DUR somehow together were accused of rate setting. And so this went all the way to Michigan Supreme Court. And he defended the village. And I do believe the outcome was that the village was not found guilty, liable, whatever you call it, in that kind of a lawsuit. And then Aaron relocated to California before 1930. And the fun story about that is that his sister Bess is the one who drove him. And I guess she was kind of a bit of a daredevil driver, and he was not going to be doing some driving. So she took him there, and it sounds like they had an interesting time. And then Aaron unfortunately died in 1961. So now we're getting to the namesake in the room. I hope you will jump in and correct anything that's wrong, and feel free to add. And for the benefit of the people online, I will repeat anything that David says. So David Levinson, born in 1896, attended Birmingham High School. We have photos of him in all kinds of sporting contexts. He graduated from U of M in 1917. He played college baseball. He joined the military in 1917, but the war was basically ending right about that time. So he really didn't see war service in that way. And you can see the portraits that we have, the one with his name under it, he just was a dapper guy, pretty handsome guy, very involved in some of the people that he went to school with, continued to live in Birmingham also. So David stayed in Birmingham, and he was part of this community and an important part of the county's history as well. A little bit more about his experience. This is Birmingham High School until 1912, when Martha Baldwin donated money at her death, and that became a new high school. And this is an example, I think, of what it was like to be Jewish in Birmingham and to go to school. You're with all of the kids from all of the families and all of the grades in one big school, and that's how you went to school year after year after year after year. So my point about that is somebody like David, who is obviously outgoing, had a lot of friends, and a lot of connections in the community here through the school, through his schoolmates that is, and through their families. Later on, David Levinson did more stuff. He married Martha Nye, his high school sweetheart, which I'll tell you a little more about in a moment. She lived nearby. As I said about Aaron, David was also a member of the Birmingham Masonic Lodge. Then later he became Oakland County Supervisor, and he was instrumental in the development of the county complex that we all know and love in Waterford, where the Pontiac, all the courthouse and all of those buildings are. He helped develop and lay that all out. Huge part of the project. And his grandson David is still, I believe, still in the real estate industry in Birmingham.
Is that name?
For the record, that's the gentleman who's in the room, and he is still in the business. And so here was David's sweetheart. I'd like to think of them as these young people in love. She grew up in the neighborhood near him. He always seemed to, be interested in her. They had a special relationship. Her family lived on Dane Street, and Dane Street is one of the streets that the Levinsons lived on for a time. So I don't know if that's how they met. Her uncle, pardon me, owned the National Hotel. At the time in Birmingham, it was an important local business. So she knew David in school. She was 1 year behind, but I think they knew each other outside of school as well. And unfortunately, as nice as she was, and as beautiful as she was, and as much as David cared about her, Gitel was opposed to them being married. Gitel was very adamant that David should marry in the faith. And Martha was Catholic. No, not Presbyterian. Okay, my mistake. Presbyterian. I just knew she wasn't Jewish, but she was an observant Presbyterian, right? I mean, they were active. I had that part right.
Did they both go to the Presbyterian church, or did she go to the synagogue with them? Do you know how that?
Well, so I think there's a little more to that, and then David can add a couple of comments. But what I wanted to finish saying about her is they married in Detroit, so they were on the outs with Gitel for a while. And eventually they lived in Detroit for a while, then they moved back to Birmingham, according to our records in 1926. And their son Bernard was born in 1927. 27. Oh, okay, good. All right, so that is correct. He was born in 1927. That helped with family relations. So now, did you have a question? Somebody in the audience has a question of David Levinson here about whether his grandfather went to Martha's church, or did Martha go to synagogue with him? And what do you say about that?
When I was growing up, neither one of them practiced. My grandfather, I believe, was agnostic. My grandmother, again, she didn't practice. My father was not raised in any religion.
Okay.
That's not.
Okay, so I'll summarize that. According to David, his grandfather, he thinks he was agnostic. And when he was young, they didn't go to church, they didn't practice or worship anywhere that he was aware of. And Bernard was your dad was Bernard? Bernard. Sorry, yeah, so thank you. Bernard did not practice either any religious.
Not until he was 19, I believe.
Okay.
When he started taking lessons in Catholicism and creed.
Okay, maybe that's where I got the Catholic thing. So, okay, all right, so let's see what's next here. So that's kind of a snippet about David and Martha. And now I'd like to tell you a little about Bess Levinson. She was born 1898. As I mentioned, she was born at home. And she was, that's an interesting scene in my mind because it's 1898 and Gitel is at home. She's in Birmingham. She's not down with family or friends or anything down in Detroit. So I wonder, you know, who helped her give birth at home? How did that go? Was that intentional? Was it accidental? I mean, I wonder all that stuff. And I don't know if you know anything about that, David.
No. Never heard of these stories.
Okay, so at any rate, she was born in Birmingham and she attended Birmingham High School like her brother did. She lived in Birmingham until the 1920s. It would appear she left when the family relocated. She also attended U of M and taught English for a time at the International Institute of Detroit. And then in 1927, she married Saul Levin. After that, she was also very active in the Metropolitan Detroit chapter of Hadassah, many other community supportive and socially progressive activities. So here are some photos we have of Bess attending school in the at about 1914. This is Bess and Saul, and their family goes on to have a higher and higher profile. First, they lived in Detroit on LaSalle, and their children were Hannah, Sander, and Carl. And those are the Sander and Carl Levin that you think they are. And I can't go into their political careers with any kind of completeness. So I'll just hit the main point that Sander served in the House of Representatives from 1983 to 2017. Carl, 1934 to 2021, and he is the longest serving US Senator in Michigan. That's a long time to be in the Senate. Okay, some more about Bess Levin as she's a little older and active. This is with her Hadassah group in 1951. And then a little about their children, Bess and Saul's children, or Hannah, Sander, and Carl. So here are some family photos that they shared with us, which are very sweet. They always seem to be smiling, and they seem to have been close always. Is that your sense of it as well? Yeah. So here's Hannah. She was born in 1928. She became a teacher. She helped with both brothers' political campaigns. She worked for Governor James Blanchard for a time. She was appointed to the Social Justice Committee in Lansing by Governors Blanchard, and then again by Governor Engler. There you go. Democrat and a Republican. She died in 2001 in Seattle, but she's buried in Birmingham at Clover Hill Park, which is where the Levins have all been laid to rest, with the exception of David Levinson, who is buried at Greenwood with Martha. And here's a photo of Sander and Carl in 1944. And the story I remember they told me when we put this picture up at our first presentation was, I think Carl said, "Hadn't you just thrown a rock at my head," or something like that? So that you can see there's a little mark over his eyebrow. And I think he said, "I've had a scar there ever since." So loving brothers, but also typical brothers, I guess you would say. Continuing into their lives in political sphere. In this photo, Bess is also in the photo, and they are watching returns. It looks like, I don't know who this looks like. One of the Humphrey. Who's the? I can't think of the anchor man.
David.
David Brinkley. That's it. Not Humphrey. Brinkley. That's David Brinkley, and they're obviously watching the returns on something in the 1970s. Another photo of the two together at a fundraiser. So you see they were together a lot. And Carl died in 2021. He was very kind when I was putting our first program together and very helpful, gave me a lot of information and asked me a few questions that we were able to research about the family and help him with some of his accomplishments. Harvard Law School, Assistant Michigan Attorney General, General Counsel for Michigan Civil Rights Commission, Detroit City Council, elected to the Congress, the chair of the Armed Services Committee, served on the Homeland Security, Small Business and Intelligence subcommittees. And Sander, born 1931, Harvard Law School, Michigan State Senate, candidate for Michigan governor, elected to Congress 1983, served to 2018 in the 9th district. And he was the ranking member of the House and Ways and Means Committee. Another Levin, Representative Andy Levin, born in 1960, Harvard Law School, elected to Congress in 2018 in his father's former seat and currently serving until this year. And this wraps up with a lot of the Levins because of their high profiles, not because Levinsons didn't contribute, just because the Levin family has put its stamp on law in Michigan like you wouldn't believe. And I just thought people needed to understand that incredible reach. So this is Theodore, who is Saul's brother, and he was the judge and chief judge of the U.S. District Court of Eastern Michigan for many years. And he has a U.S. courthouse named after him, Theodore Levin building in Detroit. And then there's Charles Levin, who is his son, and Michigan Court of Appeals, Michigan Supreme Court, and third, and not least, Avern Cohen. When we did our presentation here in 2019, Judge Cohen, who lived in the community, heard about it, and he sent me a check and said, make it available and give it out. So that's part of where these DVDs come from, is from his generosity. And at least until recently, and I don't know, are you guys still involved with these two?
Yes.
These are the Levinson and Levin together, apparently, you know, have joint ownership of the Corton building. So on the left is an older photo of the Corton building. On the right is something more recent. I don't know if it still looks exactly like that or if it's changed. And
No.
you
Pretty much the same, but we rented space.
Okay, and so they're still connected to Birmingham. And this is only a few steps down from where Morris had his original store. And not that it's the most important for most audiences, but I just want you to know there are a lot of sources that help support the information that I'm giving you. But probably my favorite is the family stories. So David, is there anything you would like to say about the Levinson side of the family, about that legacy?
Just to give you a little background, my grandfather, David, was the Baldwin County Commissioner for the city of Detroit, or the city of Birmingham, for 35 years, from 1931 through 1966, when he retired. He was the head of the Ways and Means Committee for the county for 15 of those 35 years. He's the one that established the county, basically getting his AAA bond, keeping it on the straight and narrow. He retired in 1966 because at that time my grandmother diagnosed was now multiplying with myeloma. She did not know the rigors of the campaign, which had been changed from being appointed by the city commission to going on. But he was again very much, as I can say, Sander and Carl, too, they believe that a public servant was a public servant. And, he personified that along with his nephews for their entire retirement.
For everyone online, I'll just kind of summarize. David was saying that his grandfather was a commissioner at the county level for 35 years representing Birmingham. That he forwent his political life because of his wife's illness at the end, and so that was the only thing that took him out of the public life, really, because in addition to all the other things, he also felt that being a public servant was being a public servant, and that's kind of a Levinson tradition. And actually, there's a family quote I want to go back to, meant to read it, to Hannah. I think this sums up maybe what I have gleaned about the family. What one values in life is so important, and there is none more important in my mind than the value of family. Family is a value to me more precious than gold and cannot be bought or sold. So are there questions?
Yes, there's a question. Did restrictions prohibiting the sale of property to Jews?
I'm having trouble hearing your question. You're repeating it, but I can't hear you.
Were deed restrictions prohibiting the sale of property to Jews and others prevalent in Birmingham, and if so, during what period of time?
Okay, were deed restrictions preventing Jews from owning property prevalent in Birmingham? We have not been able to find any deeds that have Jewish restrictions. We have found them for African Americans, but not Jewish people. That doesn't mean they don't exist. We have not found them and we have looked. That's all I can say about that for sure. Any other questions about? Yes.
You remember the picture of the building and you said it was, Starbucks?
Yes. Want to go back to
The
that?
text said that it was on the south side of the building, so that would make it a Lululemon.
I think that was referring to the first building. Yeah, the first store was, and then, so this is the Levinson market store. Yeah, right. So they, yeah, so they moved into this store second, so that's different. Yeah.
Okay.
You have another one from the chat? It says, what route did the Levinson station immigrating? Did they go straight to Bay City? Were there enough Jews in Bay City to have a synagogue?
That's a great question. So the question is, did the Levinsons, when they first immigrated to Bay City, did they come straight to Bay City? And were there enough Jews in Bay City that there was a synagogue there? Okay, so the question is, my understanding is they did immigrate directly to Bay City. But to get to Bay City, you first have to come to Detroit back then. You have to, right?
I mean, family lore is that they came through New York. Everybody did. At that
Yeah.
time. Traveled actually through Canada. Came into Saginaw first and then Bay City.
Okay.
And then
Okay, so
family lore.
yeah, that they entered the port of New York first, came across Canada, and this is 1888. So that would have been, you know, a reasonable thing to happen, that people came into the port of New York and then maybe came first to Saginaw and then made their way to Bay City. So they would have probably come, if they're coming through Canada, they probably would have come by boat or steamer to cross, you know, to come up the waterway. That would be my guess. As far as whether there was a synagogue in Bay City, I can't answer that question, and I don't know how big the community was there. When I did look up the Levinsons up in Bay City, I did find that, you know, one of the brothers was opened a candy store, had a candy store there. So they were, it looked like they were making efforts to sort of get into the retail commercial establishment, but later they dispersed. I think they ended up in a lot of different locations. I don't know the whole story about, because I focused on Morris coming to Detroit. So it kind of got left out of the picture. Any other questions about that? I'd like to maybe take a moment before we end to try to summarize a discussion that happened when Carl was here, with Sander and David were here, because there was a question in the audience about, was there discrimination in Birmingham when they were growing up? And Carl was sort of saying, really, I don't think so. Sander was saying, oh, yes, of course, Birmingham's always been. So I don't remember if you chimed in or not, David, or if you even want to.
Again, my grandfather, used to tease my father. After he had converted to Catholicism, that they let the Jews into Birmingham before they let the Catholics in. Because the Levinsons were in, much earlier than Holy Name, church was established. And, as I said, my grandfather would tease my father whenever my dad would bring up some sort of, racial instigation.
Right. And I think I remember you talking about how much fun you would have going to your grandparents, how relaxed they were, easygoing.
The fun thing was, we had, when I was growing up, Christmas was always at my grandparents' Levinson. In fact, Uncle Hyde and Aunt Celia, his wife, were the ones that lived around here. They would show up at our house, Birmingham Boulevard, when it was little, for Christmas morning. And then everybody would migrate over to Grandma and Grandpa's later on for Christmas Day. My grandparents on both sides were amazing in integrating two families together. I mean, my Levinson family friend became Brennan family friend, which my mother's day name, and Brennan family friends and co-workers, etc. became Levinson friends. So it was a very unique child. Both my brothers and I, both of them and I all say the other thing I'd like to bring up. When my grandmothers and Martha Nice, they were the sixth generation to be born and raised in Birmingham.
Wow.
So she goes, as was mentioned, it goes back to the Danes. And the Danes were not the first group of born, but that next group of people to
settle it.
settle.
So let me see if I can grab that one before I forget. So David is saying that on his mother's side, the Nye family, who were descended from the Danes, that he is the sixth successive generation born and raised and lived in Birmingham in that family line. And you still live there?
Actually, I live in Beverly Hills right now.
It's still in Birmingham, right?
Well, I consider Birmingham School District Birmingham. So
Easy to do that. Yes, ma'am.
When they hit the market for the store, did they observe Sabbath, area development, closed?
I don't know the answer to that. The question is, did they observe the Sabbath at the store and close it? I mean, I know they were observant Jews, so maybe there was someone who ran the store for them, if that was possible. I don't know. I'm gonna say probably in the small town of that period, a lot of things were closed. For Sunday, but I don't know, maybe. So it's a great question. I don't know the answer. I'll have to try to find out if we can tell from, ads or something.
from what I understand, Gitt's family was on the Orthodox scale, but I don't think Morris's family was. And I know I can remember my grandparents talking about having dates making candies.
Okay,
I would assume those would be weekend days.
okay. This is Gitel's father. So, what David was just saying is his understanding was that her family was Orthodox and maybe a lot more, concerned about those kinds of restrictions, and maybe Morris's Levinson side, not so much. Maybe they did have the store open on Saturday. He seems to remember stories about going in to make candy at the store. Okay, I know I'm repeating a lot of things, but I hope that helps people hear it. Yes, ma'am.
The name Jay, am I correct in thinking they lived on Day Street? Was it?
Yeah,
They were a home family?
yeah, so according to the family, the oral history, where do I have that? The first house was at the northwest corner of Dames and Woodward, which of course there's no house there now, because it's all commercial, but, and the second one, then the second home was the southwest corner of Brown and Purdy. And what David Levinson was saying is he thinks also at one point they lived for a time on Pierce Street, because there are stories in the family of his, of who was your father going to visit them there.
Is the name Day Street?
Oh, is the name Main Street from the family name?
Yeah.
Yes, it certainly is. Yep, it's the same days. Anything else?
Nothing from the chat room.
Okay, so at this point, I would like to thank everybody for coming. And I do have these, I also have more at the museum. I think I have several of them I pulled out, didn't I? I've got about 5 of them here with me. So if anybody would like one, they're available. And thanks for coming, and maybe we'll see you in the fall.